Il faut de gros signes. Le barbu et le mec à côté là. D'accord, ok. C'est des potes, hein. Oui, en plus c'est des copains. C'est des moqueurs. Vous n'avez pas de collègues? Non. Bonjour à toutes et à tous, un grand.
So hello everybody. Thank you for being here for the ex-economic meetings. Let me introduce myself. My name is Manuel Nutter. I'm in charge of the Usine Nouvelle magazine. And we're very happy to offer you this roundtable discussion on the challenges of the growing scarcity of resources. Everybody is talking about frugality. We don't want to talk about decrease in growth, but there are economic challenges and geopolitical challenges given the growing scarcity of resources and given our consumerism and production modes. So to talk about this morning, we're with Ludovic Subran from Allianz, with Tisa Mafira from the Climate Policy Initiative, Pierre Pauillac from Suez, François-Clément Grandcourt from BIC, and Vadim Medvedev from Skeleton Technologies. As the tradition dictates, we have different languages, English and French. I will be asking questions in French, and that's part of the tradition of the Rencontre économique d'Aix. There's So this is a round table, and we have Isabelle Méjean from the Cercle des Économistes, who is going to introduce everything. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the speakers. Thank you for agreeing to take part in this panel discussion on a subject that everybody is familiar with, the growing scarcity of resources. We've all heard about this, the transition towards more economic consumerism. So this involves the question of managing resources. We have a certain number of big economies. There's Europe, there's the United States, China, and they are all very much committed to policies for reducing our dependency on fossil fuels. But what we know today is that reducing our dependency on these fossil fuels doesn't necessarily mean reducing our dependency on natural resources. So just to give you an idea, the International Energy Agency believes that in order to reach a net zero system, we will have to decrease our dependency by 2/3. So that will have a huge impact on our dependency on material. But at the same time, there will be a complete reconfiguration of demand with a drop in the demand for fossil resources, but sometimes a doubling of needs for certain mineral resources, metals, for example. We're all thinking about the resources necessary to produce our batteries, our wind turbines, our solar panels. So ahead of us, for the next 20 years, there are going to be heavy investments. There will be a lot of pressure on certain markets, graphite, nickel, lithium, etc., markets that are already suffering a lot because these markets are often very much concentrated with very few market players. There are countries that dominate the production of these raw materials. Then there's the acceleration of climate change, which is making us think about fast strategies for reducing our dependency on fossil fuels. But of course, this mustn't make us forget other natural resources that are being overexploited in our growth models. We're going to be talking about water, but then there are forest resources, biodiversity, etc. A certain number of resources are already experiencing conflicts of use between sectors or people. So in this panel, we want to talk about all of these different challenges, not just the general observation, but we want to think concretely about solutions and the way we can think about a growth model that is more economic in terms of materials. And of course, this requires technological choices. We'll talk about those, but also it means having certain industrial policies. It means the circular economy in production, how to produce more with fewer materials or materials that are recycled, and how do we manage waste. So we'll start straight away. Thank you for being with us. Thank you very much, Isabelle. So that really does set the scene. Ludovic Subran, we'll continue with you. Let's talk about what Isabelle has just explained. When we prepared this panel discussion, you said to me that the economy, it's about managing rare resources. What has really changed when it comes to materials then? Well, hello everybody, first of all. So the economy, that's what it is. That's the aim. It's about managing rare resources. But as economists, we like to do this via prices. What's changed is that now there are policies that are price-free. So since COVID and the energy crisis, I often talk about the war economy without the market. So this is, what's changed today. This is how the cards have been shuffled. There's a call for resources, but we're not ready to use market-based mechanisms like the carbon price, or as Isabelle was saying, the new resources for energy transition, the green rush. But we need to set up strategic stocks. We need to have strategic alliances. We need to have industrial policies. We need to have customs barriers. But we've kind of thrown out the economy with the bathwater, so to speak. All of that's very geopolitical. There's a new form of scarcity in resources, and lots of people have written about this. We talked about this with Emmanuel. Read the Hungarian economist Conway, who explains that the planned economy was the economy of shortage all the time and everywhere. So when you try and plan for things, and obviously this is a French reflex, Jankovicien. In other words, to solve the problem of greening, you need sobriety. You're not allowed more 4 airplane tickets per life, and everything has to be nuclear. But we need to be less Jacobine, less in the hands of politicians. We often say that we've tried everything, but I think what we have to stop doing and saying today is making the management of scarcity a political subject alone. So there are 2 other things that have changed since 2020. So we've got we could have information about scarcity in real time, but we're not using it. And I don't understand why. We could think that there are supply problems when it comes to containers, that there are needs for certain resources that are deep in the ground, that are less accessible, or they're in countries that are not our friends. And I find all of that difficult. But we can't cash in on the dividends of this data, which would be useful for the market. Today, we're not wondering about the scarcity of a ton of oil or a kilo of rice, because there's something called the market that really gives us things in real time, what's happening between supply and demand. So we mustn't underinvest either in the mechanisms that make it possible to have opinion about the relative scarcity of these raw materials. And the third thing that I would like to say, which has also changed, and it's not new, managing scarcity, concerns new scarcities. I don't know whether you've noticed, but since COVID, we've all been talking about the shortage of workers. We've all been talking about the shortage of things that we didn't even know existed before. We talked about the shortage of toilet paper during COVID, for example. But I've got the feeling that we've never come out of that way of thinking. We're frightened of being short of something. So there's a psychological aspect here that's quite strong. There's a certain mistrust, if you like. So there are lots of academic articles that show this. There's micro-speculation, which amplifies these mechanisms focusing on scarcity. In 2007, when there was an increase in the price of rice by 400%, 2/3 of the increase of agricultural prices came from speculation, financial speculation or micro-speculation. I'm worried that in the future there's going to be no rice in the shops, and so I'm going to go and buy some extra kilos of it. And that's the big challenge with lithium graphite, graphene, etc. We have to find data, not give in to fear, and stop politicizing things before we've explored all of the different mechanisms so that we can discover more about the supply and demand. Now, you are from Indonesia, Tiza. Thank you for coming over to France. I think you arrived yesterday. You're very much invested in the questions of climate, especially plastic waste. You are at the head of the Climate Policy Initiative. Now, if some people don't know you, perhaps you could say a few words about the Climate Policy Initiative to begin with.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm very honored. I lead a think tank called Climate Policy Initiative. It is a global think tank, but I lead the CPI office in Indonesia. I'm based in Jakarta. And it is a think tank that focuses on climate finance. Now, as I've worked here for 10 years, doing research, providing policy recommendations for government, I'm personally also invested in something else, which is activism. Because sometimes I get impatient with policy, sometimes I get impatient with research. And so personally, I've been on a crusade against single-use plastics as a plastic waste activist in my country that has pushed for legislations banning single-use plastic. So I come from a legal background. I'm very passionate about policy. And to me, plastics and the climate crisis is one and the same issue. People like to talk about it as, oh, this is waste, this is climate, this is pollution, this is emissions. I don't see it as different. Plastic comes from oil. Plastic comes from fossil fuel. You can also make plastic out of coal. You can also make plastic out of gas. We're seeing now that there is actually no resource scarcity of oil and gas. It was discussed as something that would run out sometime in our lifetimes, but we haven't seen the resource becoming scarce. We've seen the supply scarcity because there's a few people who control the supply, a few companies that control the supply, but the resource itself is not getting scarce. So now we're seeing an increase in the production of oil and gas, and actually 50 or more than 50% of that production is going into refinery, petrochemicals, and plastic. So I view it is absolutely necessary to talk about the reduction of plastic in the same bracket as we talk about how to reduce the production of oil and gas and coal.
Justement, soyons peut-être concrets parce que...
Yes, let's be concrete. You have a very interesting approach when it comes to the Climate Policy Initiative with a very rigorous analysis based on the data, aiming to maximize the impact of everything that's invested in the fight against climate change. Very quickly, can you give us some very concrete examples of initiatives that have been led by CPI?
Our CPI views money as scarce, right? We track the flow of money. We focus on climate finance, so we have this global flagship product called the Landscape of Climate Finance, where we track where climate finance flows, meaning where it comes from, where it goes, which sectors it finances, what kinds of activities it finances, and through which financial instruments. And we do this globally, regionally, domestically in countries, and also around certain themes or sectors. So for example, our global tracking of climate finance is used by the global stocktake to inform COP discussions. And another example is our landscape mapping, climate finance mapping of, for example, Indonesia's climate finance. It's used by the Ministry of Finance to inform them whether their financing of climate action is effective. Now, for CPI, we see effectiveness as maybe two perspectives. The first perspective is that we want to see public finance being spent in a way that leverages private finance, because we want to see public and private finance working together to solve the riskier projects, right? The projects around climate action that are viewed as maybe more expensive than, mainstream traditional high carbon projects. And this is, it's a sign of market maturity for us, is where an economic sector thrives without much public support. So we're seeing some countries perform better on the public-private ratio of climate finance, but other countries performing not so well. For Indonesia, most of the climate action is 70% coming from financing from the public sector, from the government, not from the private sector. So even renewables are mostly financed by state budget, which really is an indicator of how renewables is not seen as a mature market in Indonesia. So you absolutely have to fix that. You have to focus the public finance to de-risk renewables so that the private sector will feel more comfortable coming in, and down the line the public sector can reduce its support of that sector. Now, another marker of effectiveness is to see the competitiveness of low carbon activities compared to high carbon activities. Right? We want to see more financing flow to low carbon activities and less financing flow to high carbon activities. Now, we unfortunately haven't seen that happen yet. So based on our global annual climate finance tracking, the world has surpassed $1 trillion of annual climate finance last year, actually. But according to IMF, in the same year, that climate finance passed $1 trillion, fossil fuel subsidies passed $7 trillion, right, in direct and indirect subsidies. The same picture domestically in Indonesia. About 3% of our state budget goes to climate action. About 9% of our state budget goes to fossil fuel subsidies. So we're not, effectively spending on climate action unless when we're spending, we're not spending effectively on climate action if we're spending more on the direct competitor to climate action, right? So we're seeing these are important numbers to bring out, and these are important numbers for the policymakers to make better decisions on. Thanks.
Pierre Pauillac, j'en viens à vous. Vous êtes l'un des patrons de Suez.
Let me come back to Suez and Pierre Pauillac. You were here 10 years ago, and 10 years ago we thought that water was unlimited and perhaps it wasn't going to be costly, but the world has completely changed since then, and it's now one of the resources that has attracted so much interest over the past few years. Yes, 10 years ago I wouldn't have been invited because I wasn't in the position that I'm in today either. I think that everybody's understood now that energy is the subject when it comes to fighting against climate change. It's more recent. We understand that water is the big challenge when it comes to adapting to climate change. That was 5 years ago that we understood this. We weren't yet talking, in fact, about adapting to climate change, but awareness has been progressive, and it didn't take place at the same time in each country. In France, it was the drought in 2022. In Australia, it began 20 years ago with different phenomena that took place there. There are some countries that haven't yet become aware. In France, because there are a lot of French people here, that the prices have been reduced by 20%. And the awareness is really quite recent. But I think that it's concrete as well, and we've been seeing it for 2 years among elected officials, because the challenge of water, it's a local challenge, and the solutions are local. And I've got a portfolio. I can go through the different solutions, but we're not going to apply them everywhere, these solutions. So the good news is that there are solutions. Perhaps the bad news is that they may very well exist, but we're not going to escape migration phenomena between countries, but also migration within the same country, including in France. My conviction is that there are regions in France that are going to become industrially poor, where the populations are going to diminish, and there are other regions that will be welcoming these industries and these populations. Why? Well, because we can do whatever we want. We're not going to be deciding when, how, and where it's going to rain. So our action that concerns all of us, it's about conserving the resource by saving on it, and that's something that can be applied everywhere. So, for example, you keep your tap off or just don't use your tap. We're talking a lot about desalination, about recycling, but it's really going to depend on geographies. When you have no more water in your water table, you can't fill it up. When you've got no more sea, you can't take the salt out of it. If you're in Grenoble, you will always be able to recycle wastewater, but that wastewater will no longer be going in the river. So you'll be having an impact on the biodiversity. You will be having an impact on the downstream town that will be pumping from the river. So water is a challenge. It's not the heat, it's not energy, it's not raw materials. When I talk about adapting to climate change, it's really the challenge. And it's also a challenge that concerns sovereignty. We've been talking about sovereignty a lot. So it's a challenge, a sovereign challenge. We won't be reindustrializing a country that's threatened by a shortage of water. We've been talking about reindustrializing France now for a few years. So, and this will be from private investors. They may be French or foreign, but they will not invest if they cannot be guaranteed of a supply of water, and it has to be quality water. And we're seeing a certain number of elected officials, local elected officials, there are very few countries that can, so that there are elected officials becoming aware of this, and they're trying to improve the attractiveness of their area by talking about the resource. So in France, I don't know whether we're behind, but I think probably we're among the last to become aware of the problem because we weren't facing the problem. So I think that now the world has understood water is a rare resource. It can't be expensive because it's vital. Cobalt is not vital. Lithium is not vital. Wheat is vital and water is vital. And our challenge, therefore, is to make sure that altogether we can continue to provide the population, to the farmers, to industrialists with water at a reasonable price. François Clément Grandcourt, you are in charge of the lighter division at BIC, and you're still world leader of that speciality. It's important to think about the scarcity of resources. For you, when we prepared this panel discussion, I discovered that there were 19 parts in a big lighter, but you said it's 35 for a Chinese lighter. And so you're also working and you're trying to limit the amount of material necessary. If we talk about scarcity, what are the main problems and risks from your point of view? Well, just to add to what's already been said, fire is vital. During COVID, many countries forbade us to stop the production or sale of lighters for a very simple reason, because they're used to cook. Even in developed countries, 50% of households have gas cookers. And it's often a social marker. When we talk about the Southern Hemisphere, it's even more. So we have to be able to continue to provide fire because that's what a lighter is used for. So that brings us to the question of resources. Today, I'd like to say two things. The first is that, yes, we have lighters with 19 parts, and our competitors have 35 parts in their lighters for various reasons. But this has a big advantage. The reduction of resources per flame is phenomenal. In other words, the lighter market, because Asian lighters are everywhere across the world, can considerably improve its footprint in terms of material use. That's the first thing that needs to be underlined. The second thing is that when we talk about the scarcity of materials, we often think that, okay, can I extract a ton from that mine? And if it is extracted, is it going to get to my factory? In fact, reality is even more complicated. When we talk about the material that's extracted, there's the problem of knowing what the quality of that material is. What is it going to be useful for something? And that has a huge impact for companies. When you, in your factory, you no longer have design, fitting workshops, you can't adapt your tools to materials that are a little bit different from the ones you're used to working with. And all of those workshops have been delocated. That happened in the 1990s. So let's continue with the theme of quality. In materials, as you've got recycled materials, and you've got non-intentionally added substances as well. So the materials in there, you don't know what they are. They can have some very important impacts. The first, for those producing, when you heat the material, these substances will be given off. But it's also important for the consumer. When the consumer uses the product, might be exposed to these substances that are emitted. And then when you add other aspects, such as geopolitics, is country A going to be able to deliver the products to country B? Remember that in 4 years' time, the Suez Canal was blocked 3 times. I don't know whether we'll be able to get over problems like this. When we talk about resource availability or scarcity, it's true that resources can be found in mines, but then there is the distance to the factory. So having fewer parts for lighters is absolutely essential to be able to continue to provide that flame, which is so important and so essential for populations. Tavi Maliver, let me move on to you. You are the founder of Skeleton Technologies, and I'm not sure everybody has heard of it, but perhaps you could present, because you had a big project that you announced. There was a factory project in France. But everything you do, your technology focusing on batteries for superpower. Tell us about that.
True. So Skeleton is the leader in terms of high power, fast charging batteries. And if I say fast charging, then our supercapacitors in real life have a super fast charging time. And one question to the audience, what do you think, how fast can a supercapacitor be charged? What we got 3 hours there? Yeah. 15 minutes, okay. This is more closer to home, but the reality is that a supercapacitor can be recharged in a matter of 3 seconds. That's the reality. And
3 seconds?
3 seconds. And now, what does it mean? Our energy is stored in an electrical field, not in a chemical reaction. We use no lithium, no cobalt, no nickel, no manganese. But of course, we are not the silver bullet, because now you can charge them really fast, but we are not meant for long-term electric vehicle driving. So that's why we go after the hard to decarbonize sectors. Mining vehicles, heavy-duty trucks, buses, port cranes, industrial equipment. In grid, we are currently designed into German grids with Siemens and Hitachi. And we always say, Skeleton is not in the kilowatt-hour business. We are in the megawatt-second business. So we are the last line of defense when it comes to grid. Second big topic for us is data centers, and specifically AI data centers, which require a lot of high power. And this is again where we come into play. Thirdly, it's important that if you look at our industrial equipment, then we have proper high power solutions. And if you speak about Skeleton, then we started in Estonia, and I was 21 when I founded the company. And our first manufacturing room or office was same size as this stage. But now we have done already 300 million euro investments into Germany. We have our plants running in Saxony, that is close to Leipzig. And now we are planning our next investment, 600 million euros close to Toulouse, to scale up our super batteries. But what is now important? We are not focusing on the sexy lithium-ion battery market for electric vehicles. That market is crowded with competition from Asia. And we firmly believe that if we want to be successful in Europe with strategic autonomy, we need technologies that differ from US and China. We can't only copy-paste gigafactories, which we need as well, but we need real technological differentiators from raw materials perspective.
Why, from the beginning, you focus on products without cobalt and nickel? Yeah. Why?
We saw early on that, to be honest, the answer is that back in 2009, when I founded the company, in Estonia we had very little money. That meant that if we wanted to go against Panasonic or LG or the emerging Chinese players, we had no other choice when we needed to differentiate on the product side. And brands played a key role in starting Skeleton, because our first customers were Thales Alenia Space and European Space Agency, who both understood that something that has higher power and higher reliability makes a lot of sense. And over the years, it's quite interesting that when I talked to customers just a few years ago, and you discussed the sustainability, the European value chain, to be honest, everybody said, Tavi, yeah, that's great to hear, but let's now discuss the pricing again. But now the things are changing, because we see also that with the battery raw materials, it's one thing is price stability over the long term, but other part is availability, because we see that batteries can become the new semiconductors. And this means that Europe needs to have this type of strategic supply. And I would emphasize one more thing. If you look at the industrial policy of US or China, then both of the countries, they are going after growth and heavy investments. And I don't think even the US presidential election will change that trend line. There will be industrial policy. But in Europe, we have less money. If you look at the total amount, Biden came in with a bazooka with Inflation Reduction Act of 700 billion. But in Europe, we have significantly less funding available. But that means we need to focus on the technologies which make us different. So again, our industrial strategy cannot only be copy-paste. And this is the reason for success of Skeleton. We have customers from Siemens, Hitachi, Volvo, Skoda, and others providing real value, but we always know that we will stick to the niche and we will go after the CO2 emissions, which wouldn't be otherwise saved.
Ce qu'on vient d'entendre Ludovic Subran.
Well, we just heard Ludovic Subran. It wonders about sovereignty. I liked your formula when we prepared this roundtable. You told me with this challenge of scarcity of resource, we're going to have to pick our friends. Yes, and I think that the fact that Tavi is here with us, it means that we have to work on, you have to vote, sorry, on Sunday, because you really have to pick the right friends in Europe, because we have a great company in Estonia that brings to us a fantastic technology that is affordable and as is greatly needed. Tavi was very modest and humble when he described what he's doing in Germany, but he's trying to build 9,000 kilometers of pipes for hydrogen, so that's very brave. So we need technology. He asked 2 or 3 questions, 2 or 3 things, even if I have a lot to say about what Pierre said on water. Water will remain affordable but rare. So on the competitivity and attractiveness and the fact of choosing the right friends, yes, we have a real subject of dependence, of strategic resilience. Isabelle wrote a beautiful note where she looks at what are the interests and the most essential and the less difficult to find for France, and that raises questions of public procurement, industrial policy, and I strongly encourage you to read this note. It's fascinating. We need to diversify. We probably need, on some entrants, to be strategic. We clearly need to reinforce the financing. That's exactly what Tavi was saying on industrial policy. We feel like Europe it's difficult to find its verticals of industrial policies and all that. But as an introduction, I was saying that let's try not to do everything with public money, because it complicates a lot of things, from the Minitel to the Concorde. But I think that what is sure is the question of strategic alliances. We have a new European Commission that is forming itself. If you talk to Ursula von der Leyen, her obsession is to find a balance point between French sovereignty and the German business mindset. So we have to be smart in the alliance that we forge, whether there's strategic, industrial, geographic, financial, public-private partnerships. So there's a real challenge here. And last point, in how to pick the right friends, when you think resources, I believe in Europe, I think it's the right level of scale to manage dependency that could be a vulnerability, but between friends, it allows us to avoid incompatibility between rupture of supply, very high prices, and a form of access for our citizens, something that could be redistributed easily. And that works. And I think that's very important, because the challenge of resource scarcity is not happening just within the French borders. We have to go look beyond the borders, and we'll always have this issue of attractiveness, resilience, and competitiveness. We have to find the right level on energy, on raw materials, on water, that allows us to be a strong continent. And I think that's very clear. That's where the France's voice must be heard. And picking your friends starts by picking Europe. always choosing Europe. And some companies and some sectors will have some dilemma. The US, China, dictators, new democracies, it's going to be a real challenge for them in the next 10 years. But for us at the European level, we can try to resist globalization, and on the resource sector, we could try to avoid having crazy prices that would make our citizens incapable to affording them because the resources would become too expensive or too scarce. So TISA, on the question of choosing the right friends, that's why the Climate Policy Initiative collaborates with all the stakeholders to design practical, innovative solutions to reduce emissions and to promote the development that is as sustainable as possible.
CPI does collaborate with government, with the financial sector, as well as with other civil society organizations. It's very important to collaborate. It is very important to pick friends. But I wish the best for the French elections on Sunday. The rest of the world have made their pick. Indonesia has just went through presidential elections. So for us, we no longer have the luxury of choice. We are now faced with the reality of who was picked. And in Indonesia, and a lot of the world is going through a similar process of picking, right? New leaders. And with Indonesia, the person we picked is somebody who is continuing the previous administration's focus on industrial downstreaming. And this is critical in informing Indonesia's, economic focus, particularly now that Indonesia is hyper focused on the ability to mine and process critical minerals, and has taken steps to make sure that that we accelerate the mining of nickel and cobalt, that we accelerate the creation of downstream industries to refine, to process, and to create end products, batteries, EV batteries for renewables, supply chain, and etc. Now, the issue that I see is that we and this is not just Indonesia, but I think countries that are now going through this ambition of exploiting critical minerals and processing are not seeing it as necessarily a scarce resource from the outset, right? And we are seeing the plans for, the industries that need to be built, the coal plants that need to be built to power the smelters. We're not seeing the exit plan. We're not seeing the sunset plan for when the resource becomes scarce, if it will ever become scarce. So that's going to be a problem. If you want to learn from the plastics industry, if you want to learn from the tech industries, having a circular economy starts with designing for recyclability from the outset. And you don't design for recyclability unless you are acutely aware that this is a resource that either will actually become naturally scarce or that we have to make scarce so that we don't overexploit our earth, our mining, through mining. So it doesn't mean, circular economy doesn't mean just building recycling plants. Because if we're talking about battery recycling, yeah, we're doing that. Plans are being done to create battery recycling plants. But it's not just about recycling, right? There are recycling plants for plastic. Does that mean that plastic gets recycled? No. If we learn from plastics, you have to design for recyclability. You have to design a supply chain where you have reverse logistics that takes the trash and brings it back to recycling plants. You also have to build in the economics so that there's a demand for recycled products that is more competitive than the demand for virgin products. And we're not seeing that with plastics. Still today, the demand for recycled plastics is very, very small because it cannot compete with how cheap virgin plastics are. If we had a scarcity of virgin plastics, if we had a scarcity of oil production leading to a scarcity in virgin plastics, maybe that would help the recycling industry. So let's not make the same mistake with critical minerals, right? Let's not make the same mistake with batteries. But what I'm seeing today is we're going down the same path as before. Let's take it all until it's finished, not let's just take what we need and then go on a circular path from that point forward.
Il y a des points là vraiment très importants.
There are some very important points that were just said, Pierre Poliac, on recycling and circular economy. This is a very important point. You said in one word that France was not always ahead of the game in terms of initiatives. Those types of initiatives, it took us a long time. We're lagging behind for water recycling. And we're making progress, and it's a key point, isn't it? Well, not only is it not the alpha and omega, but I don't think it's the right topic to know if France is lagging behind in terms of recycling. But what we talk about in the media, we are maybe lagging, but we're comparing ourselves to countries that recycle up to 90–95% of used waters. They're small countries, they don't have rivers, they don't have biodiversity, and in any event, whether they recycle used water or not, they send it back to the sea. So that's a pure loss for them. So used water going back to the sea, it's rare. Well, you can compare to Spain that is 12%, where we do 2%. Yeah, but they do it by the sea. So it's a small part of the solution. I will talk about it, don't worry, I will still address that point. For the industries, it's clear. Industries must recycle their water in closed loop, and everybody's behind on that. France first. For the local authorities, for our use, it will be a solution the day that we all together accept the direct recycling use, which is to direct the water directly in the freshwater network, in the drinkable water network, because the recycled water, drinkable water, is better than the fresh one that we consume. But as long as we don't have this closed loop vision that we can use it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 10 times, and this number of times that we'll recycle and use it will be proportional to the leaks of the network. As long as we don't get to that point, we'll only be a part of the solution. There are a lot of local solutions, and what is universal, and that applies for everyone, is let's reduce our consumption. For us, the population, it's 10%. Let's reduce the consumption of industries, of farmers, 70% of the overall consumption. As long as we don't do that, it won't work. You said water cannot be scarce and expensive. Sorry, you said scarce and not expensive. It will remain scarce, but if it's expensive, our agriculture will be in difficulty, and we won't be able to reindustrialize either. And for the population, it will have to have subsidies, so it will have a weight on public spending. So our first goal is to reduce the consumption, learn how to store water in natural storage that nature provides us with. So subsets in the subsoil, it will have to be desalinated. Water tables, we talk a lot about that in Spain. They talk about recycling, but they talk about desalination. They invest 20 billion in desalination. We don't do 20 billion in France to solve our problems. We're looking for billions, to be honest with you. But they don't have a choice, do they? In Italy, they have that as well. In Cornwalls, there'll be some in Belgium tomorrow, will be the last. Desalination, because of a number of wrong communication made by a particular political party, 10 years of bashing, like it can be like for the nuclear energy, it was put down. No, did you prepare your teams for the little upload? No. my main message is that we're lagging behind in the awareness that we need to have, that we need to change our approach towards water. We need to, what climate change is implying is a drop of the quantity, of course, of rainfall, and that's 15%. That's not that much because we only consume a very small percentage of the rainfall. But the rainfall are very heavy, and there could be some droughts, even in the winter, so it's not spread out throughout the year. The rains are more localized, so one territory will be very wet and the next one will be very dry. It becomes more and more unpredictable, and we build our water infrastructures on averages, and that's the problem. So we designed, and it worked. It was smart. That's what we've done for 200 years, and it was calculated on averages. Now we have to think in terms of insurance, insuring ourselves in case for something that's going to happen every 5 years, or some of you maybe one every year, or every 7 years, and that may seem expensive, but if you compare it to the fighting against climate change, it's nothing. We went from 6 billion to 13 billion in France every year. Well, 11 or 13, depending on sources, but they doubled it, in short. And this is not only to adapt to climate change, but it's to catch up with all our investment that we haven't done enough of. We haven't invested enough in the grid, in the electrical grid. It's in France, on average, you need 200 years with the current investments to renew the grid. Our friends from Pont-à-Mousson make some great products, but the average length is 80 years. And we waste a lot of water because we could save it if we recycle. We could make gains if we recycled it. 15 years ago, we still have a place in France where we have 50% of water that is coming from local sources, and maybe we. Am I too long? Yes, I think we're going to give the floor to everyone, but you're fascinating, so it's fascinating to hear you. You have your fans in the room. François Clément Grandcourt, when we prepared these roundtables, you told me we need to work with NGOs, with scientists. We need to make an assessment, take stock of what we have to try to make progress on all these issues. So about recycling, you told me what is the key here is even for a lighter, we need from the get-go that we're producing it in order that every part of it is recyclable, could be reused afterwards. Yes, absolutely. One of the issues is nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow in the world, but what is interesting from us is our side, the industrials. We have part of the solution. The scientists have part of the solution. We all have a part of the solution. So it'd be a shame not to share our part of the solution, because it would give us a larger vision. So we've worked for many years. We've met 150 NGOs in the last years to try to share our knowledge. What does that mean concretely? Invite them in our plan so they understand what we're doing, and so we can work with them and the scientists to really understand what are the issues that we have to manage. So this is a key element that helped us a lot. Then on the recycling part, yes, what comes out of it is the scarcity of resources as such. There's a difference between the time we extracted the material and when it arrives at the plant, and we have to think the same way when you throw away your product or when you recycle it. And the conflict between both. At the beginning, we picked up some lighters and would grind them to get back to recuperate the raw material, but the purity was not enough to make other lighters with us. We wasted a year and a half, 2 years while we're trying to do that. So we adopted a new approach, which was that we need to build our lighter. We should assemble them as we're going to disassemble them, so we're capable to recuperate some clean raw material and to do direct recycling. Sometimes we just clean the part and we reuse it again in the manufacturing line, in the production line. So what is really interesting is we made the same mistake again in this next step. So we know, okay, we know how to recycle the lighter. Now we're going to collect it. So we went and talked to the major collecting companies, and we realized that the lighters that they were recuperating was damaged because the liquid in the garbage was corrosive and would tamper with the purity of the material. So we then asked the consumer to go to bring it to the place where they buy the cigarettes and put it in a closed box. And this is the only way we can recuperate raw material that is really reusable. And so there's a whole bunch of ideas here that we think that we left aside and that it wouldn't think about at the beginning, and that proves that we need to work together. And we have programs for the last 7 years with external scientists. Does that make you rethink your production modes? I met recently the boss of Velo, and he said the screw is coming back because if you do welding, you can't disassemble it, but if you do screwing, it's easy to disassemble it. So that's another example. Do you have to rethink about your production mode? Yes, some people would use the screws, and that's the difference between the lighter with 35 pieces or parts or the one with 19 parts. The reality is very different. With 19 parts, it is possible to disassemble a lighter. With 35 parts, it is not possible because the material have to be welded together, particularly the plastics. So there's a world between both. So the fact to have products that are designed from the get-go to be disassembled, the Beak lighter created in '71 was eco-conceived even before the notion of co-conception existed. So we can reduce the impact by 80%. But they're going to remain plastic, right? Mostly, yes. We stay plastic because the problem with plastic is it's not managed properly, and when the plastic resin is not the right one, that's when the problems are. So plastic gets degraded at 97% in CO2 and water. So we're not using microplastics that make nanoplastics, etc. We're talking about microplastics that get degraded with X-rays, sun rays. Tavi, we heard we heard about the innovation that is extremely interesting, the one that you worked for. You announced a big project for a plant nearby Toulouse, opening in 2027. Let me ask you a question. If you don't make the right choice on Sunday, do you change your mind? Are you going to set your plant somewhere else than in France if we don't elect the right party?
Before we go there, I would a little bit like to talk about the alliances, what we discussed before. And if you look at the battery industry, there is no way nowadays you can create the Estonian battery company. Of course, Estonia has 1.4 million people, so it's not really possible. But you can't even create a German one. And apologies to the audience, but you can't even create a French one because you need this type of cooperation. And that's why Skeleton actually made the investments into Germany and now into France. Now, on top of that, what you need to look at is that why France? I will then answer your question as well, no worries. But first off, from academic side, we are cooperating with University of Toulouse Free and starting that already this year. Secondly, we are working with Airbus, with other companies in the region. And the point is that Skeleton is also part of the ecosystem of the nuclear industry. So we always say that what does skeleton mean, you might ask, is the skeleton of every energy system. And now the third part, why France was actually industrial policy. We saw that France is really going after building the industry. And now regarding the election, from our side, we actually do not see a change because let's be honest here. If you talk about industrial policy, then whether you firmly believe in climate change, or whether, let's say, you have some weird ideas or doubts about it, the industrial investments is about jobs, it's about economic growth, it's about making Europe stronger. So we will go ahead with our investments in France. We see that the current government with President Macron and Prime Minister Attal has been very supportive in terms of bringing new investments in. but we will go ahead because customer demand is there, partners are there, and these type of solutions are needed. But as a last point, what I would like to really highlight is that if we now start about thinking about French investments, German investments, Estonian ones, we really need to think that US and China are so much bigger than us. And we cannot have separate only country-based policies. And even on top of that, why we also brought in Marubeni, our Japanese investors. In climate technologies, we should really look at other regions and countries who also have resource scarcity like Japan, but who can also be our natural allies in Europe. So let's raise the ambition level, because our competitors here in France are not Poland or Germany. Our competitors are in China and they are in US, and only in cooperation we make it happen. And Skeleton goes ahead. We are on track with the start of production in 2027, close to Toulouse.
Juste un mot pour clôturer avec vous, Isabelle Méjean, parce qu'on me fait signe.
Just a word to wrap up with you, Isabelle Méjean, because people are giving me the signal that we're going over our time. Just if you have a few words for conclusion, there's not much to add. Well, we understand that we need Europe on all these issues. That's the reality. We need economy. We're not going to throw away economy with the bathwater. And we also need technological capacities, innovation, to learn how to manufacture and produce differently in a more frugal way, in raw materials. Thank you all. Thank you, Ludovic Laurent. Thank you, Pierre Toliac. Thank you, François Clément Grandcourt. And thank you, Tavi Maliberg. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. You're all here in this amphitheater number 2. Quite a large crowd. So a crowd. We know a large number of you are watching us on the internet. So you know the topic: to build bridges between countries and cities. So this is a controversy, a discussion that will take place, which is participative. We will discuss among ourselves with the speakers here, whom I will introduce in a minute, and then of course you will have the opportunity to will dedicate about 10 minutes at the end of the session to give you the floor. And I do insist on the fact that you have to ask questions and not tell us a story or your political opinion for the next 2 hours. So you got 2 prestigious speakers whom you might not meet once again in your life. So you know you will have a great opportunity within the frame and action. First, building bridges between cities and countrysides. Well, countryside, you know, have emptied. There's been a, you know, we know that a country exodus, you know, because of there's been a socio-ecological digital transition. Well, the situation is changing, because of that, and calls for a rethinking of the relationship between cities and countryside, or what I call the country instead of the cities. Okay, so we'll discuss precise example. First, Emmanuel Malcaz-Doublé, who is Director General of the PMU, which is the French track racing company, and she joined this company 4 years ago. Before becoming the young and dynamic Director General, you were the DAF, you know, the Administrative and Financial Director of the group. And then Matthias Landgren, who is with us, Matthias Landgren, who is the main advisor to the Secretary General of the International Forum of Transport for the EOCD, with a political career which is quite specific, and we'll come back to it. I think it is worth getting attention. So, because public transport are essential in the discussion. You were Vice Minister of Housing and Transport in the Swedish government and advisor to the Prime Minister of Sweden for Russian affairs from 14 to 16. So, Emmanuel, let's start with you. We see it on a daily basis. The PMU is an on-site player. You have a great meshing grid. You're a privileged observer of the situation between cities and countries and countryside. You're everywhere. Now, each of you will have about 4 minutes for introduction, and then we'll have a discussion. Emmanuel Malcaz, do you see the fracture today between cities and countryside, between the two worlds? And I would say, how can we reduce this fracture or gap? Well, to start with, we do observe on site the city-countryside fracture, but like everyone else, and this fracture is just increasing now. What can we do to reduce this gap? Because Jérôme Fourquet described this in the archipelization of society. As a leader, I'm convinced that a company, businesses should play a key role there, and not only from the economic viewpoint, but also for social democratic aspects. Why social and democratic aspect? When you ask the question to the French citizen, what is the adjective that would characterize France? What comes first is divided. France is perceived as divided. It's worrisome, because clearly we need to reinforce social link or social fabric, and especially in countryside. We did a survey with Ipsos, which shows that 75% of the French citizens that bars, restaurants, bistros, as we say in French, are essential to maintain the social link, the business, but also democracy. This is the current topic, but there is also a topic in the countryside, because, well, there are less opportunity to talk with people from different opinions, so there are more preconceived ideas and conflict, because it is by dialoguing, by mixing, by sharing that we protect democracy. So that's a fight we do in the PMU, as you said. We've got 14,000 outlets, you know, the bar PMU, you know, we know them. For the French, you know that. Just to give you an idea, there are just as many PMU bars in France that McDonald's in the US. So, you know, it's quite a lot. So it is my responsibility to maintain those PMU bars. Some of them shut down, but we keep opening them. We opened 1,000 bar PMU per year. It's 14,000 today. We never had so many, but we can see there is a need, and especially in the rural area, to meet without the gaming activity. A lot of people are betting activity. You know, the bars would close and people would have no location to meet. So there is a role in our business. You know, we play a role as well, because I don't know if you all know well the PMU company, because you know the bar but not the business as such. We do 800 million over revenues, and we do redistribute this to the horse breeding industry. So if you got no more PMU, there will be no racing horse in France. So there are 150,000 jobs in the countryside. We depend on the 60,000 direct, indirect jobs, breeders, coaches, veterinarians, you know, jockeys, you know. So we contribute to employment in rural areas. Okay, well, it's easy, natural PMU, bar PMU is your business, and so on and so forth. But clearly, there is responsibility as a business manager, and we go further. So each business should do it, have a liberal vision. You have to do it, each company has to do it at its own level with its own means. But we initiated a program last January, which is called Let's Meet Again, where every month we will give support to a sort of a meeting area. So it would be venues where there is no, you know, villages where there is no place for discussion. We have a bookstore, cafe in the Corrèze, a grocery store in the north of France, you know, a location where they do activities for children outside of schoolhouse. So many entrepreneurship projects where the criteria, key criteria are: do we promote do we foster social links, and we reduce the fracture by maintaining sites of discussion exchange? There is an economic impact because they create a new economic dynamism. But for me, the key is to maintain, to keep the social link. Thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you for sticking to the 4 minutes. So we'll go deeper into this discussion. Matthias, you worked and you still working on those topics, but at the actual level, in the OECD, and as I was saying, with your experience, Swedish experience especially, question to you. Okay, 4 minutes for introduction. The territorial fairness, does it exist?
So much. Thank you for having me on such a prestigious forum. I'm very honored to be here. Je suis très désolé, je parle juste un peu français, peut-être la prochaine fois. Maintenant, non. Anyway, so I think this topic is something that is so important in these days, especially, you know, we have election just finishing in UK. You have election coming up on Sunday. And I think, you know, when you analyze the election result, because it will be, because the election that is going on in UK and going on in France will affect not only your own country, European Union, but the whole world. So the whole world is watching what happened in France right now. And to be quite honest, when you start to analyze the election result, I wouldn't be surprised to see that this topic that we discuss today is a very, very important topic in order to make sure that you stick the country together. And it will also maybe be explained why some parties gain a lot of confidence in the population when it comes to voting. Either they vote extreme left or extreme right. I think this topic is actually a key topic to understand what happened here. Now, as Emmanuel said, I also been, now I'm trying to be a civil servant. I'm not so good at that. I think once you've been a politician, you're always a politician. So I would talk a little bit from a political side here. Now, I think in order to make sure that the countryside is thriving, which I think is the best vaccine, and make sure that the nation stand together, you need to have a national strategy. You need to have a national strategy to address all the inhabitants in your country, whether they live in the city or in the rural areas. And how do you do that? Well, you have to do it via engagement, involvement, and cooperation. These three words are so important. And also, it has to be top-down. And when I say top-down, it has to be a priority of the president or the prime minister that really will focus on these topics. Now, what would you do? I mean, you've always been discussing about how, oh, we should, involve the rural area much more, but nothing really happens. And I can say from my own experience, it's because we work very much in silos when you come to the government. You work in silos. The rural affairs work aside from the education and from the labor ministry and so on. You need to come together. And the only time you can do that is if you have the president or the prime minister saying, now we're going to take this as a task, and to unite the country. Now, I would say that there are 4 topics that you need to address in this kind of policy: a national strategy to keep the nation together, or the national strategy for a living country. You find the key word here. That is for the guys in the PR office to find a catchy name for it, but it's very important. But the 4 things that you have to have equal opportunity for housing, work, and welfare. That's key. You also need to make sure that you have skill supply, skill development, and education also on the rural side, both vocational and higher education. Then you need to foster innovatorship, entrepreneurship throughout the country. And lastly, accessibility. Transportation is key here. So that is just my introduction remarks.
Okay. Thank you, Mathias. Alors, Emmanuel, on va...
Emmanuel, let's go into the discussion. Let's go deeper into this. Is France still attached to the rural identity? What do you see? Do people from the city understand what the rural life is all about? Yeah, I think there is some kind of a French exception, which is the rural dimension. Well, 20 million of French people live in rural areas, and we got a specificity, which is the number of small municipalities. Just to give you an idea, we've got 35,000 small municipalities, 12,000 in Germany, and we are very specific in France. We know we have a major territorial greed, and people are very attached to the territory. Look at the Tour de France. The Tour de France, will insist on gastronomy, the food, the wine, the history. So characteristic of the French, and beyond that, the French, we are very attached to the farmers. 92% of farmers have a favorable opinion of farmers and of agriculture, and other figures at the time of the mobilization of the farmers a couple of months ago, 90% of the French people were in favor of the mobilization of the farmers in their demonstrations. So I do believe that we are very attached to the land, to the farming. We talk about now the short circuit, for example, but short circuits, it's all very well, local producers, but there is a need for distribution. So we need stores, we need outlets. Mathias, you were talking about transport, interconnectivity. That's also essential in the development you were mentioning. What are I would say, the main challenges that cities or municipalities, isolated villages face when there is, in terms of transport, collective transport or public transport?
Is a key here. If you don't have transport, you will not be able to expand the working region, and you will not either make sure that the countryside is thriving. So a government always needs to find subsidies to make sure that the countryside is connected. I mean, you also have to make it smart connection. You have to plan the bus routes or the train routes also for so you can go to the schools, you can go to the healthcare center, the hospitals, and so on. That is important. Another thing, which we also discovered in COVID, is internet access. You need to have fast broadband internet connection, even from the rural area. And in Sweden, when I was in office, we had a broadband strategy to connect the entire country. And as you know, you've been in Sweden, it's a very oblong country. It's an extremely oblong country. And we said by 2025, 98%, I think, should be connected with internet, high-speed internet access. And that is actually happening now. And that also means that you can start working remotely and still live in the countryside. And if you still live in the countryside, that of course means that the municipality get taxes, that you need to, have maybe a betting site, maybe not, but yes, and so on. So that is something that is so important. Transportation is often forgotten when the government is doing policies Do not forget that.
Alors justement, dans le prolongement, Emmanuel...
Precisely, Emalkas Doublé, what is the cause, the deep cause of fracture between cities and countrysides in all topics, the economy, social, life quality, demography as well? Well, let me react to what Matthias said when he thought about remote work on the internet. But it's a misleading idea to think that post-COVID everybody moved to the countryside and all problems were solved. Yes, of course, some people do, but some people get back to the city. And of course, they're often the secondary homes. You need a real economy, you need businesses on site. There is a gap which has not diminished post-COVID. So what I want to do, when it comes to education, for example, striking number, 1% chance for young people who are in rural area to gain access to the 35 largest schools in France, are the best schools. For those who live in the countryside, get 20% healthcare less than the others. So education, health, and the figures did not change post-COVID. There's been remote work, but education, health, didn't move, and employment didn't move. There is telework, but there are no companies who develop things in the countryside, not enough. So we're specific because we're very, for example, in Mayenne, in the Normandy rural area, they have horses and train the horses. Well, the French industry, as we are the first exporters, people can make a living in the rural area and travel and enjoy the globalization, but it's very limited. Now let's look at the role of public authorities, how they can help you, because you are a business, private business. You are installed indeed in a very large way all around territories, but we need public policy. Matthias, in this respect, once again, you have the political experience in Sweden. In your opinion, how do governments, regardless of what they are in Europe, how can they improve the social inclusion of rural area and access to key services like education, healthcare, and so on and so forth?
I was a little bit addressed that to your previous question also, but I think the government has to play a very, very major role here in order to stimulate this kind of when it comes to transport needs, but also to entrepreneurship, and also make sure that you have access to education. Now in Sweden, we have again, I have to take Sweden for example. That's because I know that's the best. We made a very big strategy for education that you should have colleges and universities also in less populated areas. It costs a lot. It costs immensely a lot. But, as Emmanuel said, if you have a very low population go to higher education in rural areas, that is something that needs to be fixed. And that's what we did. We did, locate a lot of colleges and universities in the rural area. That meant also that normally people who do not have a high education background from the families, they actually tend to, don't want to move to the cities, but if there is a college close nearby, that actually did affect them to go there, and I think that's so important. And another fact that I said in my introduction remarks, now this is so important that the governments get away from the silos and do it in a holistic way, and to really, as I said also in my introduction remarks, really consult with the businesses, with the academia, with the NGOs, and the local municipalities in order to keep everybody on this mission together. As I said, that is the best vaccine to make sure that the nations stay together and it will not be divided and not be polarized.
Alors je pense qu'il va y avoir des...
I'm sure there will be a different reaction in the crowd. One short question to each of you. Emmanuel, if you were to choose today one leverage to close the gap between city and the countryside, what would it be? One for me would be get countries back to the countryside. Let's not be naive. So we need public policies, strong and voluntaristic policies. But when I say businesses, there won't be the head office, but it could be business units, affiliates, production side. But we need to create jobs, employment, career opportunities, development, and this is what will create the new dynamics economically and social democratic. And let me finish with one last anecdote, my personal case. I come from Toulouse. Toulouse is not the countryside, but it's not Paris or Marseille or Lyon. Yet, I was able to see when I was young that having companies like Airbus or the pharmaceutical library, they contributed to local dynamism, yeah, because of course subcontractors, SMEs came around the company, these businesses, but it created new dynamics in public transport, infrastructures, education, culture, and companies. The presence of these companies open up new possibilities. So get the businesses back to the countryside. Matthias, same question. If there was one priority, which one would it be? Let's say you're back to business in Sweden, and we think European, and there's another Swedish for French. What would it be?
À vos yeux.
Well, it will be what I said previously. Make sure you have a national strategy from the top down. I would advise my Prime Minister, if we get back in power again, to do that. That is the key. And it has to come from the Prime Minister's office, because otherwise you will run into problem with the Ministry of Finance. They say, well, that's not money enough. The education will say, well, we need more money. It has to come from top down. And, as I said, you always need to involve, I mean really involve, and develop this national policy together with the stakeholders. I cannot stress how important that is. And in Sweden also, that might be a different case in France, I don't know, but we also involve the trade unions very much due to the fact that it's the workers also that has to be on board on this journey together, and you have to do it together.
Merci pour ces deux témoignages. Chose promise, chose.
Thank you very much for the two testimonies. So just raise your hands. We'll give you a microphone. First hand, Madam. We'll bring you a microphone, please. Wait. Could we have a microphone, please? Microphone here in the second row. Yeah, third row. Then we'll have a lady over there. Quickly. Quick. Antonin Gonzalez. I'm part of the 1% coming from rural areas who joined the Institute of Political Science. When there is a company like the PMU to go from opportunistic logic, very much like you'll do once in here, once there, you do like pointillism. So what happened when the Crédit Agricole, who are legitimate to do these actions, but to go to a strategy logic of, and how do you, in a context which is political that we know, to go to issues which are also outside of the economy, which are political, and make sure that rural areas are understood. Well, we do have you mentioned the supports we provide, but there are three dimensions. We got 14,000 outlets in France, their site of exchange, but also economic points, You come from a rural area, this is important to have these sites. We created regional offices where we got employment, 400 employees from the PME, all over France. Interesting jobs. We need jobs which are interesting for people, for our staff in the rural areas by regional offices. So we are an employer, but when concerning social democracy, again, it is by discussing, exchanging ideas. We contribute to this, but the examples you took is that in addition, we know we help financially projects we appreciate. So again, priority is create jobs, and this is what we do. Introduce yourself, and then to stand up, madam, so we can see you. Ask a very brief question. Simply, why don't you connect all the ideas from the villages? I know a village where they were able to stop the decline of the village by creating high school and now the secondary school, they created a housing center, a third, elderly pensioners home. Why don't we connect all those aspects? Second, transport issues. Well, if there were a program for all the rural areas for car sharing or using railways, that can be used in many ways. Matthias, your experience.
Well, I think you're right. I think you're right when it comes to both of your questions. That this has to be endorsed, and has to be endorsed by the municipal government. But it's so much easier if the top, once again, the Prime Minister, the President, said this is a priority. Then it will be leverage to the local municipality that they have power to enforce it. Otherwise, it's very difficult. When it comes to carpooling and car sharing, yes, of course, that is something that the state can subsidize if they want to. They can make initiatives, incentives to do that. And that also, when it comes to the green transition, if you would like to have the electrical cars, make sure that you had electricity poles also in specific areas. That is something that the state can do. We did that in Sweden. We are trying to make sure that the country will be electrified, but also in the rural areas, because it's so important. So you're absolutely right, but it has to come from the top and goes down.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, le temps nous est compté.
We are running short of time. One last question. After that, I see Madame you're very disappointed, but I'm sure you will be able to have the private talk face-to-face after the roundtable. Sir, quick. Alexandre Pastor. Districts, neighborhoods, and rural areas have similar problems, and how could we pull in the same direction to show that we are similar and we can do things together? Emmanuel, I share the views that we do have bar PMU in the districts or in the neighborhoods, near the cities. So as I said early on, for me, they're the same solutions: create jobs, dialogue, social dialogue, sharing, and how do we attract more jobs, more skilled, more competent in zones and social link. It is exactly the same principle, the same words, which you can apply. Of course, there are specificities, but a lot of remedies are similar. Thank you very much. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Matthias. We move on to the next session, and you can keep talking with the guests. Non, c'est fini là.